Hi, and welcome to Chapter 2, Doing Business in Global Markets. This became huge, obviously, with the advent of the internet, right? As soon as even a small company create a web page, you're all of a sudden an international business. So let's take a look at the learning objectives for this chapter. Discuss the importance of the global market and the roles of comparative advantage and absolute advantage in global trade. Explain the importance of importing and exporting, and understand key terms used in global business. Again, even in chapter 2, we're reminded that there's a lot of new language here that we need to be aware of. Illustrate the strategies used in reaching global markets and explain the role of multinational corporations. Number 4, evaluate the forces that affect trading in global markets. Number 5, debate the advantages and disadvantages of trade protectionism, something that the U.S. has used on and off a lot. And number 6, discuss the changing landscape of the global market and the issue of offshore outsourcing. So we start with a kind of a brief look at the global market. The U.S. market is 329 million people. The world market is 7.7 billion, on its way to 9 billion. So the US makes up 4.3% of the world market, yet earns more than 20% of the world's income and imports 23% of goods and services worldwide. So 4.3% of the world market in terms of population, and yet almost 25% of goods and services come here. U.S. customers buy hundreds of billions of dollars in goods from China, as we all know, and companies such as UPS, Starbucks, and sports teams, basketball especially, the NBA, MLB, and National Football League, operate extensively overseas. This is a list of the 10 best countries for business around the world. Anybody notice something here? That's right, the U.S. is missing from this list. Go find out why and let me know. The U.S. is the third largest exporting nation in the world and is the world's largest importer, as we saw at 23%. Importing is buying products from another country. We're all familiar with imports. Go to Trader Joe's, right? Lots of imports. Exporting is selling products to another country. Now, competition is intense. The U.S. has to compete aggressively against global competitors like China. There are two theories, one called comparative advantage, one called absolute advantage. The comparative advantage theory supports the ideas of free economic exchange and says that countries do what they do best and import the rest. The U.S. has a comparative advantage in producing goods and services. Other countries have an absolute advantage or a monopoly in things like growing coffee, making shoes, and of course we know in the Middle East, oil. Specializing and trading creates a mutually beneficial exchange. This is where international trade really has boomed. Importing goods and services. So foreign students attending U.S. schools often notice some products widely available in their countries, not available here. This gives the U.S. an opportunity to import these goods, and it's very profitable. Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, brought the idea of neighborhood coffee bars to the U.S., and we know how that went. Exporting, what can you sell to other countries? We in the United States can sell just about anything we've got, assuming other people want to buy it. Competition abroad is often not as intense for U.S. producers as it is at home. So how do we measure all this trade back and forth between countries? Well, there's something called the balance of trade. And the balance of trade, this is terminology, total value of a nation's exports compared to its imports measured over a particular period. In the US in 2021, we had a trade deficit. For those of you who aren't accounting students, a deficit means that you imported more than you exported. And we did that to the tune of $859 billion. Trade surplus is the reverse. The value of a country's exports exceeds that of its imports, and that's the position that countries like China are sitting in. Balance of payments. Now, this is different than balance of trade. The difference between money coming into a country from exports and money leaving the country for imports, plus money flows from other factors. And finally, there's an idea of dumping. Dumping is a predatory pricing technique involving selling products in a foreign country at lower prices than those charged in the producing country. So you're essentially cutting all of the companies within that country, cutting them out of the business. In the past, China has dumped steel in the US at low prices, subsidized by the government. This was fought by the Trump administration in 2017 with a 25% penalty on Chinese steel. Strategies for reaching global markets. Licensing is a business arrangement in which one company gives another company permission to manufacture its product for a specified payment. The benefits? Well, getting help with distribution, promotion, and consulting, gaining revenues it wouldn't have otherwise generated, and spending little or no money to produce or market its products. The drawbacks of licensing: if a product experiences remarkable growth in the foreign market, the bulk of the revenues belong to the licensee. And the licensing firm is selling its expertise and trade secrets, which means that someday a company can come along, take those secrets, and start their own business based on that company's expertise. Exporting. Export assistance centers help small and medium companies with exporting. It takes a lot of money. You can create a website and be an international company, but actually exporting your products is a much more complicated, much more expensive process. Indirect exporting is working with export trading companies for help with negotiating and trading relationships. You've heard of import-export people. Usually it's a joke in the movies. Well, they really exist. Franchising, something I'm familiar with personally. I was a franchise representative for Haagen-Dazs ice cream for a long time. A successful business sells the right to use its name and ideas. So you come up with a good idea, it's successful, you make a lot of money, and then you decide, well, do I franchise or do I invest in expansion? Well, franchisors need to be careful to adapt their product to the countries they serve. Young brands, home of KFC, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut, learned that food preferences differ all around the world. Taco Bell years ago tried to get into Mexico, and it failed miserably. And when they did a survey of the Mexican customers, they complained that the food didn't taste like anything. Contract manufacturing, a form of outsourcing. Contract manufacturing can be used to allow a company to experiment in a new market without incurring heavy startup costs, such as building a manufacturing plant. You contract out to somebody who already has a plant in that country. It also can temporarily meet an unexpected increase in orders. Joint ventures, often mandated by countries as a condition of doing business. For example, China required Tesla to share their proprietary secrets in order to manufacture cars there. Joint ventures can increase a company's footprint and global growth, and can be used to join forces. Foreign direct investment, that's a foreign subsidiary. The primary advantage is the parent company maintains complete control over its technology or expertise. So the company sends its own people there. Primary disadvantage: must commit funds and technology within foreign boundaries, with the possibility that their ideas are stolen or that the country goes socialist and the government takes it over. Multinational corporations includes firms that have manufacturing capacity or some other physical presence in different nations. Forces affecting trading in global markets. There are four. The first one we're going to look at is called socio-cultural forces. Culture may include social structures, religion, manners and customs, values and attitudes, language, and personal communication. It's important to understand cultural differences and think globally. For example, Chevrolet tried to sell its Nova auto in Mexico, but failed because in Spanish, Nova means not going. Who's going to buy a car? Its name says it's not going to go anywhere. There are economic and financial forces. Countries' economic differences can muddy the water. Obviously, the exchange rates. If you're familiar with exchange rates, that means the value of the currency in one country compared to another. Typically, you'll see exchange rates compared to the dollar. It affects global markets. A high value of the dollar means a dollar is trading for more foreign currency than previously. Going to Europe right now is a real boon to American vacationers because in 2018, €1 equaled $1.25. Today, the euro is 1-to-1. So Americans can buy a lot more in Europe than they could 4 years ago. Currencies float in value according to the supply and demand for them in the global market. One exception to that until recently, again, was China. In order for China to expand its exporting, China artificially kept the conversion rate of their yuan, that's their currency, very low, so that they make their products cheaper, and therefore they did better in global trade. There is no global system of laws. Laws can be inconsistent. U.S. businesses must follow U.S. laws even while conducting global business. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and Transparency International fight to end corruption and bribery in foreign markets and have had limited success. There are laws in the United States that came up over the last 50 years to restrict how much U.S. businesses could pay off foreign governments in order to get their products into the country. Trade protectionism. Advocates of protectionism believe it allows domestic producers to survive, grow, and produce jobs. There are several ways that companies protect their domestic producers. One thing is tariffs. There are protective tariffs, there are revenue tariffs. According to the Tax Foundation, in March of 2018, President Trump announced a 25% tariff on imported steel to fight that Chinese dumping of steel. The tariffs, according to the Tax Foundation, could cost the U.S. firms nearly $9 billion because if U.S. firms are buying Chinese steel, they're going to have to pay that 25% tariff. Import quotas. Quotas basically saying how many of something can be imported into a country. Used to protect domestic companies and preserve jobs. Nations also prohibit the import of certain products. That's called an embargo. Non-tariff barriers are import licensing, product testing requirements, lengthy customs procedures, and local content requirements. In response to quotas in the United States on foreign-produced cars, foreign car makers started to make the cars in the United States. BMW went into Georgia, for example. GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. That's a trade agreement among 23 nations. There's a global forum for reducing trade restrictions on goods, services, ideas, and cultural programs. The World Trade Organization, which you hear a lot about these days, independent entity of 164 member nations whose purpose is to oversee cross-border trade issues and global business practices. Now, the future of global trade is big. Brazil was expected to dominate the global market, but it has had economic troubles and widespread political corruption. Russia's economy has slowed, and it's plagued with their war in Ukraine. India has seen huge growth in information technology, pharmaceuticals, and biotechnology. I actually worked for a software development firm that was working with software developers in Pakistan, and what they wound up doing was setting these guys up in Pakistan with a company in offices, and then we'd send the software to be written out to Pakistan. So we were paying them $15 an hour to actually do the coding, when we'd have to pay $65,000 or $75,000 a year to people to code the software here. With over 1.3 billion people, China has transformed the world economic map. Many multinationals invest heavily in China. Finally, we have the pros and cons of outsourcing, which is what I was talking about with that company in Pakistan. The pros: less strategic tasks can be outsourced globally so that companies can focus on areas in which they can excel. Outsourced work allows companies to create efficiencies that in fact let them hire more workers. On the con side, offshore outsourcing may reduce product quality and can therefore cause permanent damage to a company's reputation. And communication among company members with suppliers and with customers becomes much more difficult. And that brings us to the end of chapter 2. Please remember, you've got my phone number. You can text me if you have questions. We can talk on the phone. You can send me emails and ask for Zoom office hours if you like. Otherwise, that's it for chapter 2. Have a great week.